Hello and welcome back to another update where I cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. It is your host Union, and in this one there are significant developments taking place in the Lyman direction and a few developments within the western parts of the Donetsk region. Taking a look at the Lyman direction, the Russians have managed to advance both banks of the Siversk river line and a complete collapse of the Ukrainian positions within the Serebryansky forest area. The Russians have managed to gain control of a significant portion of the trenches east of the road that connects to Kremenna in the north. They are also storming the fortified positions on a wide front to the north, where they're going in the southern direction along the roads and through the forest patches themselves. The Ukrainians have several fortified positions and trenches within the forest area, and they had recently captured additional points further to the north and east in the last month. The Russians let the Ukrainians advance deeper and deeper into the forest area, fighting over the fortifications and trenches while staying on the defensive. This put the Ukrainians on the offensive at a constant pace over the past 3 years, making this forest area one of the largest meat grinders for soldiers in this war. It is infantry against infantry. We've also seen armored vehicles, mainly infantry fighting vehicles, operating within the forest area, but for the most part, the forest is so dense that it's difficult for armored vehicles to pass through. That means for the most part, the fighting was taking place by infantry on both sides, fighting over trenches and foxholes within the forest area. I made a video about the Serebryansky forest area over a year ago where I talked about how this was the secret meat grinder because there was not a lot of footage coming from the area, but there was a significant presence of Russian and Ukrainian soldiers within the forest area, and the fighting took place non-stop. The Russians completely burned down the forest many times over with incendiary ammunitions, MLRS strikes, and a lot of artillery, while the Ukrainians were operating a lot of drones from this forest area. The fact that the Russians have now managed to encircle the Ukrainian forces by cutting off the roads to the south and to the north means that the Ukrainians within this area is now 4 square kilometers that remains under their control are now encircled, and if Russians gain full control over this, the fortifications west of it is not that dense. We're seeing the fortifications here is much denser, but that's also because we have a lot more information from this area compared to the remaining parts of the forest area. But the Russians gain control over this section, which will likely take more days, even though they have been encircled, because the fortifications simply are so dense and the forest is so dense. But if the Russians gain full control over it, they'll be able to push towards the Siversk river line and beyond towards Lyman from the forest area itself, which significantly improves the Russian situation and position in this section of the front line. Clearing the forest area from Ukrainian soldiers would allow the Russians to operate FPV drones in the direction of Sarishna and Torsk rather than the Ukrainians. This significantly bolsters the Russian offensive capabilities in the area. It also allowed the Russians to cross over the river line in the direction of Sarishna and to the rear of Siversk through the forest area, pushing through with infantry. It also causes a lot of casualties for the Ukrainians that they've been encircled in the area, not to mention the years of fighting within it. At the same time, the Russians expand their zone of control within Torsk, expanding in the northern direction as they are encircling Ukrainian forces east of the town and fighting over the residential area itself, where the Ukrainians have one crossing left across the Siversk river line to resupply their forces or to withdraw from. At the same time, the Russians push through Kolidyasi. Although the western parts of the town remains under Ukrainian control, the Russians have been able to expand in the southern direction, the direction of Myrna, to gain control over that, which will open up the road for fighting in the direction of Sarishna. So we're seeing the Russians expanding their zone of control and their offensive operations in the Lyman direction significantly over the past 24 hours, but especially over the past month. The Russians gaining control over all of these areas will enable for a push in the direction of Lyman itself. Geolocated footage also confirms Russian presence here to the north of Sarishne on the outskirts of the town, as the Russians are developing offensive operations in that direction as well. With this, we can see that the Russians are developing offensive operations with the objective of gaining full control over Lyman and the surrounding areas, with the Siversky Donetsk river line to the south and the Usk river line to the west. This will significantly improve the logistical situation for Russian forces and will enable the start of pressure re-entering in the direction of Sloviansk for the first time since 2022. It is becoming clearer and clearer that the Russians really are aiming to gain full control over the Donetsk region this year, with just under 4 months left for the Russians to achieve this goal. With the fighting over Pokrovsk, the fighting over Kościanivka, and the fighting over Lyman and Siversk, the Russians are all encroaching on the Sloviansk-Kościanivka line, which will then turn into the Sloviansk-Druzhkivka line, as Russians will be pressuring Druzhkivka from the east, south, and west. With Lyman under their control, they will be pressuring Sloviansk from the north and from the east, and with Pokrovsk, they will be flanking it from the west for an encirclement of it, and we're seeing the Russians getting closer and closer to the full capture of the Donetsk region. The developments in the Serbiansky forest area is therefore decisive for these developments, as the Russians will be clearing up a lot of positions, freeing up a lot of their forces for offensive operations westwards towards Lyman. In the southern parts of the Donetsk region, the Russians continue offensive operations on the northern flank of Pokrovsk, gaining control over the southwestern parts of Nukhanorivka as they look to gain control over it and push onwards towards the railway station in Droshny, securing the northern flank and eastern flank of Biletske for an offensive operation towards the town, which is a large town with a pre-war population of approximately 10,000 people. There are several apartment complex buildings and larger residential areas within the town, although the small size of it. Similarly, Rodinsk is also a large town with a pre-war population of about 10,000 people, with several apartment complex buildings and so on. Both of these are within close proximity and both are along the main highway. Getting control over these positions will allow the Russians to operate with these as logistical hubs for offensive operations in the northern and western and southern directions towards the city itself, and cutting off all of the supply lines associated with the rear of Pokrovsk. So this significantly threatens the Ukrainian positions within the city and its logistical and supply situation. The Russians also managed to secure some positions in the southwestern outskirts of the Donetsk region, clearing the northeastern parts of Novokhatsk, therefore securing the southwestern flank for their efforts in the western direction towards Andreevka-Kletsove, and the Russians continued offensive operations into the Dnipropetrovsk region, gaining a foothold within Sqkm, following several strikes on the town, both MLRS, artillery, and FAB strikes on Ukrainian positions and vehicles within the town, clearing the way for offensive operations to reach into the outskirts of it and entrench themselves within it. The Russians are developing offensive operations following the capture of the second town, which is Malivka, within the Dnipropetrovsk region. Based on all of this, we see the Russians continue to significantly bolster their offensive operations, splitting their efforts in one direction after another, expanding the offensive operations with their siege of Kupiansk in the north, developing offensive operations direction of Siversk and Lyman in the east, and the offensive operations in the vicinity of Kościanivka and Pokrovsk in the south, and offensive operations in the southwestern outskirts of the Donetsk region for the flanking of the remaining parts of Zaporizhzhia region remaining under Ukrainian control along the Dnieper River. While all of these developments are taking place, the US increased the pressure on Russia in an attempt to stop the war, get a ceasefire, and negotiate a peace. However, so far the Russians are refusing to do so because they believe that they have a significant advantage on the front line, which will allow them to achieve their goals that the Ukrainians refuse in the negotiations. The deadline Trump posed to Russia was first 50 days, then it switched to 10 days, which means the deadline is Friday, the day after tomorrow. This means that the Russians have just 2 days to figure out a deal with Ukraine or to appease Trump. Otherwise, Trump will inflict 100% secondary tariffs on Russia. Anyone who buys Russian oil will receive 100% tariffs to their country from the United States. This is a significant economic punishment on buyers of oil from Russia, while stopping the buying of oil from Russia would also be a significant economic toll on their countries. India, for example, buys about 2 million barrels every single day, which adds up to approximately $50 billion every year. If they are to stop buying oil from Russia with just a $5 to $10 per barrel increase, it will be about $5 to $10 billion extra payments every year. If the price of oil increases on top of that, then the Indians can look up to almost double the price that they're paying today by dropping oil. The same for India, the same for Turkey and other countries which are buying oil from Russia. Therefore, all of these countries have refused the United States' demands and are saying that they will not accept stopping buying Russian oil due to the United States' pressure and their threats. Therefore, several analysts doubt that the United States will go through with it, because putting 100% tariffs on India and China and Brazil and Turkey and many other countries, all of it adds up to severe economic consequences on the United States itself, while the benefits themselves aren't very clear. Witkoff met with Putin today. The meeting lasted 3 hours. It's not clear yet what came out of it, but news have reported that Putin may be offering a limited ceasefire where neither Russia nor Ukraine strikes energy infrastructure in the similar cases with long-range missiles and drones permanently, where the fighting will just continue on the front lines. This could appease Trump, so we'll have to see the outcome of these meetings and the end of the deadline in 2 days. With regards to the frontline situation, it is very clear that the Russians are developing offensive operations at a very fast pace, and that we may see more localized collapses similar to the Syrpyansky forest area, as the Ukrainians are spread out across the front line and threatened on many sections of it. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon and YouTube membership for additional content. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.